All right. Welcome, everyone, to the MikeDrop podcast. We are here celebrating episode 24, the music of Iannis Xenakis. I am Mike Truesdell, and I am joined here on the other side of the screen by the one and only Mike Compatello, everyone.
Got my metal flags ready to go today.
How about the 18 Acme whistles?
Yeah. We should have just called this episode The X-Files.
The X-Files. Welcome, everyone.
The truth is out there.
One
of we're gonna open the window. There's just a big X taped on it.
And one of us is Mulder, and the other is Scully.
Yeah. I want to be the guy on the phone with the really raspy voice.
Okay, we can make that happen.
What was his name?
I have no idea. I can't remember that.
Oh, okay.
I really want that. I really only remember like a couple moments from that whole series, but I've loved watching it.
Oh, they're good. They're good.
Yeah.
Maybe we could redo the podcast as the X-Files, where the two of us are investigating various sonic mysteries.
I love that. And but one of us is David Duchovny. Gillian Anderson. That was Scully, right?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay, I love this. All right, well, we've lost all of our listeners.
Yeah.
Sorry. Should we talk about Fresh Prince of Bel-Air also?
Yeah.
Got any more in living color, maybe? Like, can we do some more dated TV references?
Ouch.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Okay, well, we're here talking about the music of Iannis Xenakis. And I had a thought, if I may start this. Are we saying his name wrong? Is it
probably?
Is it because I always said Xenakis, but I think it's Xenakis, like K-S, Xenakis.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Xenakis. Yeah.
Xenakis?
I think so.
Okay. Well, apologies to everyone because I know over the course of the next 45-ish minutes, we will let a Z slip in the talk of
we will.
Iannis Xenakis.
There is this thing though, because I think it comes up with the titles of his pieces.
Yeah. Which
is that this is a person who we know spoke English and we know spoke French and moved to France, and so most of his works became known to the public through the French music scene, and so most of the pronunciations are not Greek, but are sort of French Greek.
Oh, like Francophised.
Right? So we're used to sort of Xenakis.
Oh, I like
Pleiad, or versus Pleiades, which I think is the correct way to pronounce that name.
Yeah,
right?
but when somebody says that, don't you kind of like look at them like, hey, you know, if they say Pleiades, it's like, oh, you don't know.
Yeah, so
you don't know.
Yeah, so I think he's got like a French thing happening here.
Yeah, he's like Chopin or something, right?
Yeah, I would love to get, just like we did with Florent and our French pronunciation, I think we should get somebody who's fluent in Greek, especially ancient Greek, to just walk us through the titles of his pieces.
I think I would need help with the references too, because I don't think I know a lot of these references.
Oh yeah, I guess, did you study ancient Greek mythology? It's like a cheat card for his repertoire.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to know, because he obviously did.
That's the one where the person killed his 8 brothers and then stabbed one.
Right, and then married the other.
Married the other 4.
And they're all a big happy family, and it's totally fine. Don't ask.
Yeah. It's a 3-act play.
Yeah, with the chorus, mind you.
Yeah.
The chorus has to commentate. I think the crazy thing for me about this is Xenakis is kind of like, I'm going to say this kind of loosely, but he's kind of like our Beethoven. You know?
Yeah.
Like, he's written this music that's so identifiable with us, and he's like our major composer. And it seems that over the course of time, like teachers have gotten into like, they teach it in a certain way, and there's like camps, and there's like
Yeah, totally.
performance
Totally.
practice, and everybody has a way of doing something, and it's like, no, that's not what he wanted. It
That's
seems like
right.
he's like
Yeah,
kind of our
totally.
Beethoven.
But yeah, and the same as Beethoven, where he sort of pushed us into a new zone,
Yeah.
through instruments, through types of music, through this like brutality. Yeah, I think you're right. He sort of shepherded us from this sort of serialism, which, let's be honest, was not great love for percussion. Took us
No.
from that to this sort of kind of just all-purpose modernism, I guess.
Sure.
And I guess so. Yeah, I totally agree. He's one of the 3 or 4 composers who I think, if you're studying percussion at a music school, you kind of have to get to know their music, because
Yeah.
not even just because of their music, but because of how their music influenced other people's music. I mean, we essentially have him, Xenakis. I've been trying to avoid saying his name now. So basically have Xenakis to thank for this kind of very particular drum setup,
Yeah.
and for very particular kind of music, very particular kind of sounds. And when those sounds come now, you sort of think, oh, that's a Xenakis thing,
Yep.
I guess, right?
Yeah,
So,
and I think
yeah, I totally agree with you.
it's kind of wild that he's our Beethoven, if I can keep saying it. He's like our big formative person, and was alive for a good majority of like my childhood. Right, he died
Exactly,
in
yeah.
2001, and I know some of my students weren't alive in 2001, but we were, and we were like functioning musicians in 2001.
Yeah, I've met people who met him.
Yeah.
That's kind of something that it's interesting. You know, he taught at Indiana University, which I find totally incongruous.
Yeah. Doesn't seem like a Xenakis place, right?
Could you imagine him in Bloomington?
Yeah, it's just him and like a bunch of blue cheese and like the guns.
Bloomington Bagel Company.
Yep.
Shout out to Bloomington Bagel
Bagels.
Company.
I wonder if he went.
Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, I didn't think about it that way, but yeah, this is somebody who has a huge impact on our field. Was alive during a period of time where their life was pretty documented.
Yep.
Had a actually really long career of writing music,
Yeah.
and wrote a lot of music that was, I would say, almost all performed. Some performed, of course, a lot more than others, but
Yeah.
so kind of nuts.
And do you think that Xenakis is kind of identified with percussion? Like, I feel like if you talk to people and you say, hey, what do you think about Xenakis? I think a lot of people will say, yeah, he's got good percussion music. You know, I think that happens.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think he's more important to us than he is to other people, other instruments.
Yeah, I don't get that.
But I do think that his music, the inspiration for it is inherently, to some extent, vocal.
Yep.
You know, there's this ancient Greek vocal rhythm, the poetic feat.
Mhm.
There's the melodic writing that he has, these sort of big sound structures, which are really not possible as much with percussion. So I think his music, I don't necessarily think of as only working on percussion, especially his vocal music and his string music are sort of like, I think, peak
Oh,
Xenakis. And so his same for his big group pieces.
yeah.
But I do think you're right that for people like us, for percussionists, he seems to be more valuable.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's not accurate. Like I've heard people say that before. I've heard people say, well, you know, Xenakis, he's a percussion composer, and he wrote some other stuff, but you know, we don't really play it very much or whatever. And I think that's so silly, because the orchestra music is so powerful, and some of the choral writing can be really dramatic. I think that the issue, like we were kind of talking about before we started recording, was that it's kind of a chore to put on a Xenakis piece because there's
Yeah.
just a lot of moving parts and a lot of logistics.
And it's really hard.
It's really hard music.
Yeah, it's written. I think of sort of two things. Maybe this is putting the cart before the horse in our conversation, which of course we meticulously planned down to the minute.
That's right. It's all scripted,
But
actually.
it's all scripted, just
Even
like
this.
wrestling. So the one thing is that in his music, he tends to treat performers not necessarily as like heroic interpreters, but as people that are as cogs in a larger thing that's happening, right? You're part of a big cloud of sound, or you're doing this, or you're doing this. So you're not necessarily needed all the time for your personal input, which can be hard for people.
Yeah.
The other thing is that the music
Cool.
is just so different in character and sound than a lot of other music that you might play, that it's phenomenally difficult, and it requires a lot more from you. Like the music is some of it is just impossible. You can't play that many notes at the same time. You can't play that loud. You actually cannot glissando on the bassoon. So what are you supposed to do? It requires a lot from the performer. So it's thankless in some way. Would you say something like that?
Oh,
Or
totally.
are we missing something here?
Yeah, and I have a like thesis thought that I might give at the end after we talk, if all goes well.
Shouldn't we start with the thesis?
Well,
'Cause
yeah.
I think we have similar ideas. Because I thought, preparing for this, that we both sort of agree that if you want to get to know a composer's music for percussion, it's really helpful to get to know their music that's not for percussion or includes percussion and other instruments, because usually the percussion pieces are a little harder to parse or understand because, it's for snare drums or it's for wood blocks or something like that. So that was sort of my thought going into this, was thinking, well, what is this person's music like in general? And can that help you play percussion? Is your thesis about that, or is it more of a Martin Luther kind of thing?
Yeah, I have 99 of them. But no door.
All right.
There's no door.
I'm muting myself. Yeah.
I forgot my hammer at home.
Yeah.
But I think that's something that speaks to this. What you're saying is something you said in the Delacluse episode. Was it 16?
Mm-hmm.
Is it episode 16? I don't know. I'll look.
I don't know. I think so. I think it was.
Delacluse?
How do you remember that?
Delacluse. But in the Delacluse episode, you talked about not necessarily. We did talk about Delacluse's other music besides the snare drum pieces, but you talked about like other French music that influences what Delacluse maybe was wanting with the interpretation of the snare drum solos. That's contrary to what people are looking for in like a conservatory or an orchestra audition setting right now.
Yeah.
And I wonder if this is kind of similar. That one of the theses that I showed up with today was that I feel like the percussion music is played in a character that is I'm going to say unmusical. I think that a lot of the percussion music is played unmusically, because it's interpreted as percussion music. But this is interesting. I never thought about putting in the context of these other like large orchestra pieces or percussion plus other pieces where there is more life and maybe a very different character than there is in the boom 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 of the percussion pieces. That's interesting. I don't know. I want to toss that around in the dryer of my brain.
I mean, I agree. I agree. I think one easy thought that comes to mind is like, you look at his other music, and I've been leafing through it for the last 30 years, I guess, and there are a lot more 6 Fs in his music. There are a lot of dynamics, and so like when you open up Rebond and it's a single F, that's actually pretty soft.
Yeah.
By his own standards. I was looking at this piece Polytope.
Yeah.
And there's like a 10F moment in it. And I guess my thesis was kind of like yours too, which is like, what is this person's two things. One is, does this person give us clues about how to play their music?
Yeah.
And two, should we do those things in 2024 or not?
Yeah, we have the option.
You know, when I think about Xenakis, I think sort of big outsider energy. You know, someone who was forced to leave their country, not necessarily welcomed in a new place, was generally not accepted as a composer, was more accepted as an engineer / architect. Kind of got high rejection. Started making music that's super brutal and kind of combines this, I don't know, architectural sensibility with just this like almost kind of savage thing.
Yeah.
It's like acoustic computer music, where there are these masses of sound. You know, he's interested in like clouds of things and natural phenomenon. I just think somebody where there's a anger in a lot of this music that also sort of attaches itself to like ancient Greek stuff.
Sure.
So I don't know. I'm wondering is do we need to know that to play Xenakis's music, or does it not matter?
Well, I mean, you could say that about like, do we have to know the history behind fill in the composer's name? Right? Like, does it help me to know about the Heiligenstadt Testament to interpret a Beethoven symphony? Or, yeah, like, does it matter? And in some ways, like, yes, and in others, no. And I think that I can't imagine like it hurting you to know something about the composer or about the context of a piece. I don't know how that would hurt.
I can't either. Especially because we're kind of far removed, right? So right now, there are a lot of people that play Xenakis's music as like super suave and groovy, which of course works too. But I imagine when it first came out, it was not that.
Yeah.
You know, especially the percussion music. There's a lot more sharp edges in those pieces than not. So I can't imagine it not helping. And it's a fascinating time in music history because we have a lot of people talking about their own music at the same time. So what do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about like, well, what do we need to know to play Xenakis's music?
Sure. I mean, we could like. I think that there's a lot of things. Like for me, some of the things I was thinking about with this music was, first I kind of went down a rabbit hole of like percussion music specifically, of like, what are we talking about? Like, what's the
yeah.
So I looked at some percussion music, and then I started to think myself about some of the like the performance of it. And the like performance practice, or like what are the qualities of performance or the qualities of the music. So yeah, I'm happy to talk about anything though. I mean, is there something that...
Let's do that.
Do you want to go
Let's do that.
percussion-y?
Can I? Yes, but can I also, once we talk about characters, talk about some pieces that don't necessarily have percussion that I think if you're a percussionist would be good to listen to because they're sort of like, oh, that's very applicable to his percussion music.
Oh yeah, because I might not know all of those either. I mean, I'd love to hear about that.
I've started to go deep, but this person has a lot of music that is a lot of music that you listen to and you go, oh, that should have been a percussion piece.
But before we even get into percussiondom, we should give like the biggest shout out in the world to Sylvio Gualda.
Yes.
Right? Because I mean, we wouldn't have what we have if it weren't for him. He's the one. And is he still alive? I hate to ask, but I think he is, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's it's so wild to think that he was around before all of the percussion music, and he's like kind of the reason we have most of the music that we have.
Yeah.
It's so wild. And the same thing with like Christoph Kaskel.
Yeah,
right, like,
totally.
Can you imagine being around before solo like percussion composition.
Yeah. I mean, I think Gualda was born in like 39 or 40.
Okay. That would make sense,
but
like, because if he's in the 70s, if he's like around Xenakis, like really
yeah.
playing.
How crazy is that? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
big
shout
shout out. And I actually I forgive me for not knowing, but I don't know how Gualda and Xenakis met or how they started to work together.
Ooh. I might have to look back. There's a really cool like typed interview with John Hepfer on the Monday evening concerts.
Oh, where he
interviews Sylvio Gualda, and it's awesome. And I feel like it's been so long since I read it. It might be in there.
Okay. All right, John Hepfer, we're coming for you.
All right, here we go. Yeah. Shout out to John. John's a good boy. So can I just go through some of the percussion music just so we
Let's do it.
Like I think most people know about the solo pieces, Rebon and Safa. But then there's also like the percussion ensemble pieces that I think a lot of people have known, right? Like Persifasa and Pleiad, Oko. We can talk about that in depth. But there's also some pieces that we don't talk about a lot that are percussion specific. And for anybody who's like has that mode disc or collection of discs that Steve Schick and Redfish Bluefish put out, that's amazing. I don't think they print it anymore. I don't think. But if you have it,
I don't think so. But you can stream it.
Awesome.
So.
Okay, yeah, and that's a really good like disc. It's not comprehensive, but it's a good set of discs that has great performances on it. And I learned from looking on the Mode website just a couple days ago that one of the discs has a wrong edit on it.
Really?
And they said you can send in your disc if you have like whatever serial number. You can send in the second disc, and they'll send you the real one with the real edits.
What?
Yeah. Fun.
Well, this is adding more to our like forthcoming typo podcast.
Yeah. Can we correct our own podcast?
Yeah.
So there's other pieces that are like percussion with other instruments, like the oboe and percussion piece Dematin and Cassandra with baritone voice. Then there's the two harpsichord pieces, Comboy and Opa.
Yes.
Yep. One of those. And those are both written for, there's Sylvio Gualda had a duo with a harpsichord player. And so Xenakis like wrote another piece for Sylvio Gualda, and that duo has like a couple albums that are out with other pieces for percussion and harpsichord.
Wow. Nice.
And then there's like percussion solo with a group. There's like Ais is the baritone and percussion double concerto. There's Omega, the percussion solo with the chamber ensemble. And then there's a couple pieces that I didn't know. There's a piece called Call Pair, I think, Khalperr, for brass quintet and percussion.
Okay.
There's an A and a B of a piece called Eidmen, A and B, and Eidmen A is with choir, and Eidmen B is a percussion ensemble piece.
Wow. Okay.
And as far as I could find, those are like the percussion centric pieces.
I think there's one other, which is this huge opera, Orestia, which is based on the 3-play cycle.
Yes.
But that one, I mean, it's ensemble, but the percussionist is sort of a soloist.
Yes.
In it.
Okay. Thanks.
I think that, but I don't know if that's necessarily one. And he does have one that's for. I don't know if you would consider this also percussion. That piece, Plecto.
Yeah. What's the instrumentation of that?
That is Piero ensemble plus percussion.
Okay.
Yeah, and and it's basically like a Rebond setup
Oh,
with Piero ensemble.
amazing. Cool. I didn't listen to that.
It's not like Omega where it's a solo piece.
Yeah.
Like the percussionist is occupying a solo role. So I don't know if that counts in your.
I don't know. I think it all counts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of the what I would consider, and then those other pieces are great. And then the recordings of that mode disc or the mode collection is really, really great. But then there's also like these recordings that if you're part of a school, you probably have access to these through your library. That they have, through, was it Naxos maybe? You can get into like the mode library, and they have like video performances that are really great. They have an interview with a Xenakis that's on there. And then of course, like, the Percussion to Strasbourg recordings, and then like everyone has recorded Rebond and Safa, including our very own Mike Compitello, who has a phenomenal recording of Safa.
I wouldn't say that it's authentic.
No, but it's great, something. And it's a great video by our amazing guests, 410 Media.
That's right, and we broke all the rules. It was audio and video at the same time. Not a good idea.
Yeah, and I will say that I've been inspired that by talking about this, that I have a recording of myself from the Tromp competition, playing Rebond A in the live round, the first round, and I think I'm going to release that.
Oh, you should. I remember you play it really fast, or at the written tempo. That's what I meant.
Maybe, yeah. We can talk about performance practice of that in a second, but
yeah. Like, can you do everything in the piece?
I can't do everything at any tempo.
Yeah. Okay, here's a question I have for you. What are these pieces like? If I had to ask you, but in preparing for this, I made like a list of like, well, what are the Xenakis adjectives? If we had to play a game, but what are the percussion pieces? What are they like?
Okay. Can I ask you to tell me your adjectives? Because I didn't think necessarily about adjectives that they are. I thought more about what I hear in people's performances, which makes me...
Oh, that is a great way of approaching it. Because I listened to his pieces that don't have percussion.
Yeah.
And I started to think, well, what is that music like? And then what are the things I would call in the percussion music? Because I had this initial suspicion, like, if I just characterize all the recordings of Xenakis, would that his percussion music, would that even be accurate? I don't know. So, sure, I'll give you some.
And it's tricky, but to just before you even get into it, it's tricky because a lot of people's experience with Xenakis's music is through recording. So if we pass down this like way of playing Xenakis's music, are we passing down, like, is everything getting passed down that is kind of like the interpretation of the last person? Is it just a big game of telephone? Or is there something in there that's like a part of the music itself that's getting communicated each time, and we're actually accessing the core of the music? It's hard to tell.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, that brings up a larger question of like, does that matter?
Yeah.
But okay, yeah, characters. I mean, I would say like brutal, uncompromising, maybe almost austere sometimes. There's an element of groove in some places, but I feel like a very strong architectural energy. I would say massive, meaning that there's like masses of sounds that coagulate and don't. I would say almost blocky. Sometimes the music does not have like a lot of elisions or smooth transitions or things like that. I would say that there's like a kind of an ancient Greek thing happening and some of the colors and some of the rhythms. Yeah, but I would say those would be my adjectives. Do those
Yes.
match up?
So, I mean, something that.
Oh, I would also say like effortful, full of effort. Like to that the music tends to have, and performances too tends to have this sensation like this is really hard, or this is really passionate, or something like that. I don't know.
Do you think that okay, well, if a composer or if a musician of some kind asks another musician in music school, tell me about Xenakis, and that student has read their history book, they're probably going to say, oh, well, he was an architect who composed in an architectural style.
Mm-hmm.
And is that accurate? Like, are we just passing along something that a teacher told us one time? Like, is it accurate that he's really an architect making architectural music? And like, is that it? Are there other things besides architecture that help his music along?
I think there are other things, of course.
Yeah.
And I think it would be doing him a disservice to say like, oh, he's just an architect or just an engineer, because I think his job with Le Corbusier wasn't even an architect. He was like an engineer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I mean, of course, those principles get into his music, but I think one thing that's interesting about Xenakis's music is that it has some of those techniques from math, probability theory, and stochasticism, and some ideas from architecture about drawing lines and transitions between things. But it's also got this whole kind of mystic thing, this ancient Greek inspiration, but also that like in the colors and the rhythms and stuff. And then there's this other thing that I think is just Xenakis. And so I don't think it's just architecture in sound, because I don't know, it just doesn't seem like that's there all the time, or that it's the only thing that's there. Is that sort of what you were thinking about?
I want to be clear that I believe that the mathematical brain, that he seemed to be quite gifted in developing his mathematical side of his brain, and that is very much a part of the music as far as I can tell. So yeah, architecture is a big part of it, and I don't think that person's wrong by saying, well, he used architectural principles in his music. I mean, so did a lot of composers that were less mathematically minded. But also, it's something that maybe would come up if we talked about Steve Reich too. Is like, here's this formula, and I'm plugging these things in, and this is how it spits out music. I've decided that, as like Xenakis would create a formula. The formula would spit out, let's say, a binary thing, and then it would realize itself in music. But there has to be a human behind the process to know where the process works musically and structurally, and where do we stop the process and start a new one, or where do we alter the process. And I don't think that he was a systematic composer, period. I think that there's art behind it as well.
Oh, I totally agree.
Yeah.
And I think that I can't remember the quote, but that he said it's not enough to just put mathematical formulas in as music. You have to be doing things with them.
Yeah.
I actually think of Xenakis as like pre-spectralism sometimes, where his music can depict these sonic phenomenons, like a big riot on the street, or the sound of rain, or the sound of water, or a cloud of gas or something.
Yeah.
His music's able to do that, which I think you have to tinker with things in order to get that to happen. So yeah, I don't think this is somebody who just copy pasted their way through things.
Yeah. So, well, I'll add a couple things to what you were saying too. That I think that in addition to like the structural elements, that you and I would probably both agree that there's drama in the pieces.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
like
Uh-huh.
you can sense like two polar poles, like maybe fighting for something, or you can sense like the movement of an idea through something, through a struggle. Um, and without putting a program to any piece that he didn't want to program to, I can
Mm-hmm.
feel these elements. And like you were saying, like a group of people will form together, and then they'll like move something in a way that's contrary to something else, and it creates this tension and this
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
drama. Or like think about in Safa those pauses for
Mm. Mm-hmm.
20 seconds at a time, or for
Yeah.
10 seconds at a time in the middle of this dense thing. Like those pauses, which you can find in like not only Safa, there's other pieces too, I think, but that creates this huge drama, not only sonically but also theatrically.
Yeah, totally, totally. And for me, it all clicked when I was listening to the Oresteia piece, which is based on those three ancient Greek plays, or it is a setting of them. Just like, oh, that's it. Because the vocal writing and the percussion writing, and there's like a lot of just really jagged spaces there, and it just made me think, oh wow, yeah, this music it's full of space, even though it's noisy. Like the best parts of the solo percussion pieces and the two sextets are these like crazy spaces in the middle of them.
Yeah.
So I agree.
And also like I think there's dramatic things that happen, like we
Mm-hmm.
talked about, but there's also theatrical. And I don't mean
Yes.
that
Yeah.
I don't mean that he's like out there and you should like always wear a sparkly outfit and um make a big show out of this, like visually, because you don't have to, because I think he's written it into the music. Like for me, the
Mm-hmm.
like the Persifasa, where he surrounds the audience on purpose. He knows how he's
Mm-hmm.
written this part, so it should be spatialized. There should be like this, it has to be theatrical. And like on
Mm.
Pléiade, where he specifies how you're set up. And then I was just listening to Cassandra again this morning, and how
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
there's two voices that the baritone is using,
Yeah.
that's in
Yeah.
dialogue, and that is like as theatrical as you can get. It's like almost the definition, right, of like there's this dialogue between two characters.
Mm-hmm.
The percussion,
Wow.
functions in another way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I feel like there's drama, and then there's theater.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're right.
And
You're right.
not in a weird way, not in like a percussion-y, like marimba lady way,
Uh-huh.
but
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, you're totally right. It's dramatic music.
I think so.
Sometimes actual drama and sometimes dramatic music.
Yeah,
Yeah, totally. I think his pieces are dramas. Yeah, you're right.
yeah, and it's totally what you were saying too, that like if we're looking at this tradition of Greek like expression, like this
Mm-hmm.
theatrical expression that they kind of mastered for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
like how is it not that? And didn't he say
Oh, it
like
totally feels like that. Yeah.
he said something like I'm a classical Greek living in the 20th century or something?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So he
And his
recognized.
when you listen to some pieces, you're like, oh, I totally get this. And then with other pieces, it's a little less clear that but I definitely know that when his name's on the concert program, you're gonna get a contained dramatic experience.
Oh yeah, and
Something is gonna happen.
like the
Yeah.
texture, how he can
Mm-hmm.
manipulate a texture. Like all of a sudden you have this
Mm-hmm.
swarm of starlings like moving through the orchestra, and
Mm-hmm.
then at other times it's just one single sound.
Yeah,
Uh,
totally.
and how do you deal with
Yeah.
that as an audience member? Like
Yeah,
I
and
think,
it's difficult to deal with as a performer because a lot of it flies in the face of how we were trained to play our instruments,
yeah,
or how we were trained to think about what could music be. Like he's written things about, my music doesn't have counterpoint; it just has things happening at the same time, as one another, and so we're so used to certain things. And yeah, gosh, I wonder how different Xenakis' music would be if he was born 30 years later.
Yep.
And he had a bunch of computers around him instead of the computers that he was working with when he was working.
Yeah. And also if like you were saying before, if he were alive at a time or wasn't the kind of person who wanted to be documented as much.
Yeah.
Like
totally.
if he didn't say that about counterpoint, would we feel more inclined to introduce counterpoint to his music?
Probably.
I do.
Yeah. I mean, he was living at a time, that was like a polemical era.
Yeah.
Right, where a lot of composers in the 60s and 70s were pretty talking about what their music was like, or what it was supposed to be like, or what was in it.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So I totally, yeah.
And he was did he do the Darmstadt course? He was there, right?
He did, and then he sort of like split away from them eventually.
Yeah. I remember he
thing.
kind of like dipped out a little bit.
Yeah, he dipped out.
Okay, so I've got some questions for you about the performance of Xenakis' music. Number one, which is a silly question, but maybe not. Does sound matter for Xenakis? Like, if we've got all this dense stuff, like, why does it matter if we're all 61 of us are playing a different part? Like, why do I have to curate my sound, or do I have to curate my sound? And then similarly in the percussion thing, like when I'm choosing my instruments, if he doesn't have an instrument in mind for Safa, does it really matter what I choose?
Ooh, that's a good question. The first one's a harder question.
Does sound matter?
I think that, well, no, if you're a one person in a huge group.
Yep.
Why does that matter? I think it matters because you need incredible specificity to appear random. And humans, we don't really do random very well. So I think that if you want something to sound stochastic, you need incredible fidelity towards something. But for the percussion pieces, yes, I think sound really matters, obviously. I think it matters what you pick. In a case of pieces where he doesn't tell you what to pick, there are, I think, more limited options than you might think. One thing that I think it's even written in the front of Ribbon or something like that, but in terms of sound, Xenakis, I think of the sounds in his music are not like culturally. They're not cultural signifiers. So that actually pretty limits the instruments that you can choose. He doesn't want something that does not remind you. I found the quote. He doesn't remind you. He doesn't want an instrument that reminds you of some other instrument or which has other associations. He just wants a category of timbre. So like when a woodblock, not the kind of woodblock that sounds like Appalachian Spring, or like maybe not a tabla. Or so instruments, percussion instruments that don't make you immediately think of a cultural association. So I think of it does matter what instruments you choose with Xenakis' music, because you have to avoid certain things.
Yep.
That's kind of my thought. And when you think about it, it is quite weird. He's asking you to take like bongos or congas and play them with sticks.
Yep.
Which is something that would really piss you off if your main instrument was the bongos.
Yeah.
Bongos or something. So I think he's asking you to do things like that. And then, he's asking you to come up with certain sounds that actually you're sort of limited in what they could be if you're trying to make something that sounds like nothing.
Yeah.
I guess.
Okay.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I definitely think sound
question
matters. And I think that the moment for me when I realized that sound matters in Xenakis wasn't in like a drummy thing, because a lot of times I hear I hear people play, or I've heard people play drums that just didn't sound very good. And it's like, okay, this is like a small single-headed tom-tom, and I'm just going to play it because it's supposed to be a high tom-tom sound, and it doesn't really sound very good. But for me, the place where I really remember thinking, oh, sound matters, was in Demothen when I heard it live the first time. And there's a moment where the oboe has these multiphonic harmonics that goes into a vibraphone passage, and I thought,
oh wow,
yep, he heard that. Like, this isn't
totally.
Just random notes on a page that came out of a formula. This is somebody who's hearing sound. So I'm going to ask you another follow-up question then. So I think a lot of these iconic composers, even going back to Beethoven, Brahms, Mozart, and then for us, like 20th century, like somebody like Stravinsky, like there's a very iconic sound. There's a way that we play these composers' music. What's the sound for Xenakis?
Ooh,
I don't have an answer for this, but I have thoughts. Like, because for me, the sound, like when I'm trying to determine sound, a lot of it has to do with like articulation, the body of the sound, and then the resonance. And so it's just basically like trying to mess with those three parameters. And if I'm trying to categorize Stravinsky's music, which we could do another episode someday, if I'm trying to categorize Stravinsky's music, it's a lot of front, not a lot of body to the sound. It's something that just like exists and it gets out of the way so that something else can do something in the same time. So should Xenakis's sound, and we can even talk strictly percussion, but like, should it be a really attack heavy sound with not a lot of body, or should it be a little bit of both? What do you think?
Ooh. Well, I think the non-percussion music, there's a lot of body that we don't necessarily see in the percussion music. That there's a lot of glissando.
Yeah.
The Metastasis, his first big piece, or even the string quartet, Tetras, like it's all, the middle of the sound is so important in generating this visceral energy. But the percussion music obviously has a lot of attack. There's a lot of attack there, I think. There's aggression. I don't ever recall thinking about how a sound ended in a Xenakis piece. They just kind of end.
Yeah, I mean the very last bass drum note of Rebond, maybe.
Yeah. Well, there's a moment in Pleiades where there's a diminuendo, a group diminuendo in the Poe movement, and it does feel weird to play because you're sort of like, I've never diminuendo in Xenakis' music. I've never like gotten softer with no intent to get louder again.
Right. Yeah, that could.
It just hasn't happened.
That's going to be on someone's doctoral exam this spring.
Find all the diminuendos.
Yeah, done. I'm done. Yeah, I found it.
Yeah. The typos, they were all typos.
Yeah, because I was thinking about it, and we can talk about it more when we dive in deeper to like a specific Xenakis piece in a future episode, maybe. But do I want like a big round tom-tom sound when I play?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Or do I want something that just like hits and is out of the way? And that'll help me choose a single head versus double head. That'll make me choose how to tune drums and stuff. But, or if I'm playing, like let's say Rebond B or something, do I choose a wood stick versus a mallet?
Oh, well, here are my thoughts on that. Is that I like to choose sounds, which I guess Steve Schick calls the modular approach. I like to choose sounds that play with one another. So let's say you have like 8 sounds that they're all sort of broadly similar in how they respond, their attack, their decay, their resonance, and that maybe have like a gradient of some kind, so that if I hit each of them the same volume, they all respond around the same volume.
Yeah.
And I like sounds where I can effectively mix them together, so it's not like a hi-hat and a piccolo woodblock and open hi-hat and piccolo woodblock, but rather I can go and have them kind of mix. I can control that. And Yeah, and then with the drums, personally, I like it where the lower in pitch you get, the longer the resonance and the deeper the tone. And then as you go up, it gets crisper and drier to where you get the bongo that's like you're basically hitting on the rim of the drum because it's so crisp. So that's my thought about how Sorry.
Yeah, I don't
We
think
set a timer in our Zoom meeting and it just played a almost Olympic fanfare
I don't think
when
people are
time
gonna
ran
hear
out.
that.
So that's what I like, because I know that in his percussion music, very often you're playing multiple instruments.
I
And
love
so
that.
I like to have instruments where I can use them with one another and not have to really adjust. It's like when when one instrument you hit it this loud and it's 5 Fs, and the other instrument you hit it the same loud and it's like a pillow.
Oh yeah.
I like to have some granular control. But what about you?
Yeah.
All single-headed toms, all rototoms.
Definitely rototoms. It's yeah, because we should get back to percussion performance practice. That's what we need
Yes.
right now. We need to go back 40 years. But but I love that thinking that like we're making, like, your approach is more about I'm making one instrument that's a super instrument.
I'm trying, yeah, and I don't know if that's the right thing to do or not.
I think that we should maybe touch on that if we ever touch on Safa specifically, where you get to choose your instruments and it's pretty wide choice. Like your instrument, your A group could be drums or wood.
And it doesn't even need to be the same A instruments through the piece.
Yeah, it's so
the A's can change all the time.
yeah. So just like set up an instrument on a stage and then just walk around.
Yeah. Those are all A1, by the way.
Yeah, so I haven't even touched the C group.
Yeah.
Okay. So sound, that's what, dynamics. Yep. We got it. I don't know. I have one more thought.
Okay, hit me.
Is it time for like this is where I got to in like thinking about Xenakis as a whole.
I want to know.
There's a quote from John Cage's Silence where, and it's a quote that I actually like put on my website when I first made a website.
Whoa.
Because it struck me, and John Cage wrote, "Percussion music is revolution." And I thought it was so cool as like a young percussionist that here I am rebelling against something. I didn't even know what I was rebelling against. I just knew that percussion was cool and it was validated by this composer that other people recognize and was kind of a weird person in music history, but also kind of still part of the canon. And he validated us. And I really loved that. Percussion music is revolution. And I didn't know what that meant. But the more I feel, the more I listen to Xenakis' music and the more I play his music, the more I think that maybe Xenakis is the actual embodiment of that quote. That Xenakis' music, I think, itself is almost literally revolution. That he comes from having a personal history of rebellion and like the marks of which are on his face, right, that everyone could see. And part of revolution is like having something that you're fighting for. There's like passion there. And there's also an element of us versus me. Like we can only do this if it's all of us together and we're all fighting against this other thing for something else. And those other folks that we're fighting against also are together. And they're thinking that they're fighting against us. And so there's this constant battle, this push, and sometimes there's nothing that happens. Sometimes it's incredibly busy. And so when I'm hearing this music and I'm hearing the sound swirling, I'm hearing the density like accordion through the piece, I'm thinking that this is as close to an embodiment and a depiction of revolution as I've ever heard in music. So
that is fascinating, and I 100% agree, and I never thought of it that way, and I think you're totally right. That there's and maybe that's why it's so uncomfortable sometimes. Yeah,
because it's like it's like being around a couple who's fighting sometimes.
Yeah,
right? You think like, that's a very impassioned argument, and I really don't want to get involved, but I have no idea what they're talking about.
Totally.
But yeah, so I mean, maybe if somebody's out there, just take a listen to Xenakis' music, especially the non-percussion stuff too, and let me know how off I am on that. But I feel like there's so much in the characters. There's these characters, and there's struggle, and there's relief, and there's joy, and
yeah. But
they're all
and
fighting.
I was even
for
just
something.
thinking, and I mean, even this piece, the solo bass piece with Theraps, which was written I think the same time as Safa, but it's basically like a depiction of like protesters being gunned down on streets. So there's a element of like literal revolution in his work. So I'd love to hear what other people think. When you parse it that way, there's definitely ways of thinking about him playing Xenakis' music that maybe we should be more brutal than we already are. In his music.
I mean, but there's many ways to revolt. So right. I mean, for me, I'm not a person who's going to go out and yell on a street about something. I'm not the Xenakis person, but my revolution is going to take maybe a more introverted way or a more personal, intimate way. And if you're one of those people too, then your performance of Xenakis is probably going to be closer to the way I play it, rather than somebody who feels like the way to get your ideas across is to shout louder.
Got it. Yeah. Interesting. I love this.
Well, that's the stay tuned for more, because as Mike C and I were talking about before we pressed record here, there will probably be a future episode where we get into some more nitty-gritty specifics about Xenakis, so stay tuned for that at some point in your future life.
Yeah, we're excited to, Xenakis is one of those, I think both of us are not, we're a little afraid to go on the record about like our specific performance practice desires, because we know they can change, and they really vary based on performance circumstance. But I'm excited to talk like approach with you too, and in the music of Xenakis. So I'm really stoked for it.
Yeah, same here. Well, all of you folks out there who are listening on the podcast app, we've got a video element also, and I know that there's a lot of visual aids that I add in while I'm editing. So sometimes it's really beneficial. Like I'm thinking especially about episode 20 about organizing sticks and mallets. Like that one you kind of got to watch.
You went to town. It was great.
Yeah, we got a lot of good visual aids in there, and some of them are tongue-in-cheek and hilarious, and I spend time making jokes to myself. But yeah, so if you're interested, check out the YouTube page, and if you're on the YouTube channel and you want to take us on the go, then feel free to check it out on your favorite podcast app. The MikeDrop Duo has a website, MikeDropDuo.com. That's where you can find our episode pages, where we have links to everything and show notes. And you can read our bulleted bios, which is one of my favorite things I've ever done.
Yeah, that was fun.
And obviously that's a Mike C suggestion, that bulleted bio. That was fantastic. But that's a place where you can contact us. So MikeDropDuo.com, click on the contact link, and fill out that form. You'll see the Mike and Mikes that the amazing Hannah Collins made for us on that page. And send us a line and let us know what you're thinking about the episodes, if you have ideas for future episodes, or if you want us to come to you and do a live podcast from your
Ooh.
location, let us know.
Yes. We have a pay to leave thing.
Yeah, what's the sabbatical? Who's the HR rep for us, by the way? Is it you or me? Who's HR?
I'd pass.
Who's the dean?
I bet you would be good at HR. You'd be good at HR.
Maybe.
I just want to be good cop. Is there a way I could be good cop?
You are, yeah. Maybe that could be something we put on our bios. Mike C, good cop. Mike T, bad cop.
Good cop.
Yeah, good cop.
Bad.
Good cop. Good cop.
Good cop. Good cop. Crap.
Oh no.
We need to hire a bad cop. We need a third mic.
Well, we'll find one in the Music for 18 Mics.
That's right.
Well, everybody, that's it for our brief episode on Iannis Xenakis' music. Iannis Xenakis' music. And many thanks to Mike C. and all of our amazing teachers who have helped us through understanding Xenakis' music. That's all for now. So thank you, Mike C., and see you next time.